My name is Savannah Mercer. I'm 31 years old. The night my family stood up and applauded my brother for becoming a self-made success, I was sitting just a few chairs away, silently staring at the banking app glowing beneath the dinner table. My mother raised her champagne glass high inside an upscale private room at a country club outside Chicago and proudly announced to everyone there, "Ethan built every bit of this on his own. No shortcuts, no help, just hard work and determination." The room instantly filled with applause. My cousins clapped, my aunt smiled proudly, family friends nodded in admiration, and Ethan sat there soaking it all in like a man who had earned every ounce of praise being thrown at him. He even pressed his hand against his chest and gave that humble smile he used whenever he wanted people to think success came naturally to him. Meanwhile, the $7,200 warehouse payment I had made for him that very morning still showed as pending on my screen. I didn't cry. I didn't interrupt. I just waited for him to correct her. He never did. My mother kept talking about his discipline, his sacrifice, his business instincts, and with every word, it felt like someone was dragging broken glass across everything I had quietly given up for him. For almost 2 years, I had been carrying his company behind the scenes. I paid the warehouse lease. I handled the commercial insurance. I covered software fees. I rescued payroll whenever he panicked and promised me he was only weeks away from finally stabilizing. And now he was being celebrated for standing on his own while I was drowning underneath the weight holding him up. Then my mother turned toward me with a bright smile and said, "Savannah, you must be so proud of your brother." I slowly placed my phone on the table, then I smiled. "Absolutely," I said calmly. "And if Ethan really built all of this alone, I'm sure he'll survive without the $7,200 monthly support I canceled tonight." The applause stopped so suddenly, I could hear silverware hit a plate. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Ethan's smile stayed frozen on his face for a second too long before the edges finally cracked. My mother stared at me like I had humiliated the family in public instead of simply speaking the truth. Across the table, my father slowly lowered his wine glass, while one of my cousins whispered, "Wait, what does she mean canceled?" Ethan laughed first, a fake laugh, the kind people use when panic arrives before pride can stop it. "Savannah's exaggerating," he said quickly, waving one hand dismissively. "She helped out a little in the beginning. That's what family does." I unlocked my phone again and slid it across the table toward him. "The warehouse lease renewed this morning," I said. "The insurance payment is due Friday. Dispatch software renews tomorrow night. Payroll assistance was scheduled for Monday morning before I canceled it. Want me to keep going?" This time, everyone saw the fear hit him. My mother immediately grabbed my wrist under the table and hissed, "Not here." I gently pulled away from her. "Why not here?" I asked quietly. "You praised him here." Ethan leaned toward me, lowering his voice. "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked directly at him. "No, Ethan. I financed your image. That's not the same thing." Silence swallowed the room. Real silence. Not awkward silence. Not polite silence. The kind that arrives when everyone suddenly realizes they may have been applauding a lie. And in that moment, I saw something in Ethan's eyes I had never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, fear. Because he knew exactly what I had done. I hadn't yelled. I hadn't exposed him online. I hadn't even threatened him. I had simply removed myself from every account, every payment, every contract, and every emergency bridge that had secretly been keeping his business alive. The warehouse manager already had notice. The software provider would shut down access after midnight. Insurance wouldn't renew without payment. And the payroll transfer he assumed would clear Monday morning no longer existed. Ethan tried to recover with another smirk. "You wouldn't actually do that." I opened my email, pulled up the confirmation notices, and turned the screen toward him. "I already did." My cousin stopped chewing mid-bite. My father shut his eyes for a long moment, like he was trying to rewind the last 60 seconds and stop them from happening. My mother leaned toward me, panic rising into her voice now. "Savannah, please fix this." That was the moment I realized none of them understood what had actually happened. They thought I had made a threat. What I had really made was a decision. Ethan shoved his chair backwards so hard it screeched across the polished floor. A few people at nearby tables turned to look at us. "You can't destroy my company because you're jealous," he snapped. I stood too, but calmly this time, slowly. I wanted him to see I wasn't shaking anymore. "I didn't destroy your company. I said. I stopped carrying it. If it falls apart without me, then maybe it was never yours to begin with. His face flushed deep red. My mother started crying immediately, but not because I had spent nearly 2 years sacrificing my life for him. No. She cried because Ethan was finally being exposed in front of people who admired him. That realization hurt more than I expected. But strangely, it also hardened something inside me. My father finally spoke. His voice sounded careful now. Ethan, is what she's saying true? Ethan didn't answer. That silence said more than any confession could have. Instead of responding to Dad, he looked directly at me like I had broken some invisible agreement between us. You promised you'd help until things stabilized. I laughed softly. No. You promised things would stabilize 18 months ago, then again 6 months later, then after Christmas, then last month, then last week. My mother wiped her tears angrily. This is not the time to keep score. I actually smiled at that because suddenly I understood the rules our family had always lived by. Ethan was allowed to take endlessly. I only became the villain when I finally started counting. I grabbed my purse from the chair and looked around the table. Well, I said, enjoy the celebration. I'm sure the self-made businessman can pay the dinner bill himself. Then I walked away before anyone could see my hands trembling. Behind me, Ethan shouted my name once. Sharp, furious. I never turned around. Because for the first time in years, his emergency wasn't mine anymore. By the time I reached my car, my phone was already exploding with calls. Ethan first, then Mom, then Ethan again, then my father, then Ethan again. I sat behind the steering wheel with the doors locked, staring at their names flashing across the screen like alarms. For years, those alarms controlled me. If Ethan panicked, I answered. If Mom sounded disappointed, I apologized. If Dad told me I was making things harder, I shrank myself smaller until everyone else felt comfortable again. That night, for the first time, I let every single call go unanswered. When I got home, it was nearly midnight. I made coffee anyway. Then I sat alone at my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and clicked on a folder I had created months earlier. Ethan Payments. I hadn't made the folder because I planned revenge. I made it because part of me already knew someday I might need proof that I wasn't imagining any of this. Inside were lease receipts, transfer confirmations, overdue notices, screenshots of desperate texts, and one voice memo Ethan had sent after I covered his first warehouse deposit almost 2 years earlier. I clicked play. His voice filled the kitchen. You're saving me, Vanna. I swear I'll pay you back before anyone finds out. Before anyone finds out. That line sat in my chest like a stone. He never wanted help. He wanted invisible help. The kind that allowed him to stand in front of people and proudly call himself self-made, while someone else quietly bled behind the curtain. At 12:11 a.m., the first real message arrived. Dispatch software locked me out. What the hell did you do? I didn't answer. 7 minutes later, another text appeared. Drivers are texting me. Tomorrow's routes disappeared. Then another. This is serious, Savannah. At 12:43 came the message that finally made me stop staring at the screen. Stop acting crazy and turn it back on. Not thank you, not I'm sorry, not I lied. A command. Like my role in his life had never been sister, only support system. I opened my banking app again and canceled the last scheduled transfer, still pending under the note temporary assistance. Temporary, a label that had somehow lasted 22 months. Before confirming cancellation, I typed 6 final words into the memo section. Support ends here. Figure it out yourself. I stared at the confirmation page afterward for a long time. My heart pounded hard enough to hurt. But underneath the fear was something unfamiliar. Relief. Not happiness. Not revenge. Just relief. The kind you feel after carrying something impossibly heavy for far too long. A few minutes later, another message appeared from Ethan. If I lose everything, everyone will know it's because of you. I nearly laughed. Even his collapse had to become my responsibility somehow. I turned my phone face down on the counter and walked away from it. That night, I slept badly, but for the first time in years, I actually slept. The next morning at work, my best friend Claire Donovan found me staring blankly at a spreadsheet during lunch break. Claire worked with me at a healthcare compliance firm in downtown Chicago, and she knew me well enough to recognize when my silence meant something serious had cracked underneath the surface. She sat across from me with her salad untouched and narrowed her eyes. What happened? So I told her everything. The dinner, the applause, the canceled payments, the midnight messages, the threats. I expected shock. Instead, Claire listened quietly all the way through without interrupting once. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and asked a question that hit harder than anything Ethan had said. How much of your life have you postponed so your brother could pretend to be successful? The answer slammed into me instantly. Everywhere. It was in the apartment I never upgraded because Ethan needed one more month. It was in the certification program I delayed twice because his warehouse rent came first. It was in the vacations I canceled, the savings account I kept draining, the dental work I postponed, the groceries I budgeted carefully while Ethan posted photos from expensive networking dinners and called them business investments. I even realized I had developed the habit of checking my bank balance before buying basic things for myself, because somewhere deep down, I was always preparing for Ethan's next crisis. Claire leaned closer. Savannah, boundaries don't become cruel just because selfish people hate them. I repeated that sentence silently to myself the entire afternoon. Boundaries don't become cruel. By noon, Ethan had sent 27 messages. By 3 o'clock, my mother left a voicemail saying, "Your brother could lose everything." I listened to it once in the parking garage after work and whispered quietly to myself, then maybe everything was never stable. That evening, Ethan changed tactics. Instead of anger, he tried guilt. He sent me an old childhood photo of us sitting on the hood of Dad's truck outside our old house in Missouri. I was maybe 12. Ethan looked around 8. My arm was wrapped around his shoulders. Under the picture he wrote, "Guess family means nothing to you anymore." For a moment, my thumb hovered over the keyboard. The old version of me almost answered. She would have explained herself, softened the boundary, apologized for upsetting him, maybe even offered one final payment with conditions nobody planned to respect. Then I remembered the country club dinner, the applause, my mother proudly announcing no handouts, while my money literally kept his business breathing. I deleted the message without replying. Then I reopened my laptop and created a second folder beside Ethan payments. I titled this one, "Do Not Forget." That folder wasn't about revenge. It wasn't for court either. It was for me. Because deep down, I already understood something painful. Stopping the financial support wouldn't be the hardest part. Surviving the guilt my family would throw at me afterward would be. 3 days later, my mother texted me. Sunday, 7 p.m. Family meeting at the house. Not, "Can you come?" Not, "Are you available?" Just, "We need to discuss what you've done." That sentence told me everything. Nobody wanted to discuss Ethan's lies. Nobody wanted to discuss the money. They wanted to discuss my refusal to keep sacrificing myself quietly. For a while, I considered not going at all. Then a strange calm settled over me. If they wanted a meeting, fine. This time, I would bring the truth with me. I spent an hour printing everything: lease agreements, bank transfers, insurance receipts, software invoices, emergency payroll confirmations, text messages where Ethan promised repayment, messages where he called the support temporary, and the text from the night before blaming me for his collapse. I placed all of it neatly into a plain brown folder. When I arrived Sunday evening, Ethan was already seated at the dining room table, wearing the same expensive watch he once claimed a client had gifted him. My mother sat beside him with tissues nearby, like he was the wounded party in all of this. Dad stood near the fireplace with his arms crossed, already looking exhausted before anyone spoke. The room looked exactly the same as it always had growing up. Family photos, warm lighting, perfect furniture, a room designed for appearances, a room where uncomfortable truths were usually unwelcome guests. Mom started immediately. "Savannah, you need to restart the payments until Ethan has time to recover." I didn't even sit down. "No." Ethan slammed his palm against the table. "You're doing this because you can't stand seeing me succeed." I stared at him for several seconds. Your drivers couldn't leave the warehouse Friday because your routing software got suspended, I said calmly. Your warehouse manager emailed you a delinquency notice yesterday morning. Your insurance broker called me because my card was removed from the account. Ethan, that's not success. That's a costume. Mom's jaw tightened instantly. You're humiliating him. No, I replied. I'm refusing to keep humiliating myself. Ethan stood up and pointed at me. You promised to help me. I promised temporary support after you said you'd repay me in 3 months, I shot back. That was almost 2 years ago. You act like I forced you. Without answering, I opened the folder and spread the first stack of papers across the dining room table. The sound of those pages sliding over polished wood felt louder than shouting. Receipts, invoices, transfers, proof. Facts finally entering a family that always preferred emotions over accountability. You didn't force me, I said quietly. You manipulated me. There's a difference. Dad finally stepped closer. He picked up one invoice, then another. I watched his face slowly shift from irritation to confusion to embarrassment. $7,200 every month? He asked quietly. Mom immediately snapped at him. Robert, don't start. But Dad kept staring at the paperwork. Ethan tried grabbing the papers from him, but I pulled the folder back first. They're copies, I said coldly. Take them if you want. For the first time all night, Dad looked directly at Ethan instead of me. You told us investors were covering operating costs. Ethan's jaw tightened. They were. Savannah just helped bridge a few gaps. Dad looked down again. Every month? Ethan looked away. That tiny movement changed the room. Mom noticed it too, but she still refused to let go of the version of Ethan she wanted to believe in. Instead, she turned toward me with tears in her eyes. Why would you let us believe he did this alone? A broken laugh escaped my throat before I could stop it. Because every single time I tried to say I was drowning, you told me not to ruin Ethan's moment. Silence. Heavy silence. Mom lowered her eyes. Ethan didn't. Instead, he leaned forward and delivered the cruelest thing he could think of. You've always needed attention. That's what this is really about. I felt the old version of myself flinch, the girl who used to apologize just to keep peace in the room. But she stayed silent this time. I gathered the papers slowly and looked directly at him. You're right about one thing, I said. I do want to matter. At least enough not to bankrupt myself for someone who pretends I don't exist. My mother whispered weakly, He's your brother. And I'm your daughter. Nobody answered that. Nobody could. Then my phone buzzed against the table, an email notification. I glanced down automatically and immediately recognized the sender. Ethan's warehouse manager. Past due balance. Access suspension begins Monday morning if payment is not received. Ethan saw the subject line over my shoulder. The color drained from his face instantly. My mother's voice cracked. Savannah, please. I looked at all three of them one at a time. Monday is not my responsibility anymore. Dad slowly picked up another receipt from the table, staring at the total printed at the bottom. Then he looked at Ethan. How much debt are you actually in? Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his life, the golden son didn't have a polished speech ready. No confidence, no charm, no performance, just silence. I closed the folder, tucked it under my arm, and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I heard Dad ask again, quieter this time. Ethan, how bad is it? I didn't stay long enough to hear the answer. I already knew it was worse than any of them wanted to imagine. That night was the first crack in the image Ethan had spent years building. But the collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened piece by piece, humiliating piece by humiliating piece. Monday morning, he officially lost warehouse access after failing to pay the overdue balance. By Tuesday, 2 drivers quit after payroll deposits bounced. Wednesday afternoon, one of his largest delivery clients canceled their contract after multiple missed shipments. By Thursday, the confident business posts disappeared from his company's social media accounts. By Friday, his professional headshot vanished too, replaced by a black square with no caption. Dramatic enough to make people ask questions, vague enough to avoid answering them. Meanwhile, something unexpected started happening to me. I began using my money on myself again, and it felt almost rebellious. The first thing I paid for was the fraud analytics certification course I had postponed twice because Ethan needed help more. When the tuition payment processed, I braced for the familiar panic that usually followed large expenses, but it never came. Instead, I felt something strange: space, breathing room. At work, my manager, Daniel Brooks, noticed I had been staying late to complete the training modules. One evening, he stopped beside my desk. "What are you working toward?" I told him about the certification. He nodded thoughtfully. "That could put you on the leadership track for audit review." Leadership track. The word stayed with me the entire drive home. I had spent so many years functioning as Ethan's emergency backup system that I forgot I was allowed to build a future for myself too. 2 weeks after the country club dinner, Daniel assigned me a complicated compliance review project that normally went to senior analysts. The old version of me would have assumed I wasn't qualified enough. This time, I accepted it without apologizing. I finished the project 3 days early. Daniel emailed afterward. "Excellent work, clean analysis, promotion level execution." I saved the email immediately, not because I needed praise, because it reminded me what became possible when my entire life stopped revolving around rescuing someone else. Ethan, meanwhile, was unraveling publicly. He borrowed money from 2 cousins and never repaid them. He asked an old college friend to float payroll and got shut down immediately. Then the social media posts started: quotes about betrayal, posts about loyalty, passive-aggressive captions about people abandoning you when times get hard. My mother liked every single one. Then one Saturday morning, Ethan posted another childhood photo of us online. This one showed us standing beside a lake during a family vacation when we were kids. Underneath, he wrote, "Some people forget blood when money gets involved." I stared at the post for maybe 8 seconds. Then I blocked him completely. Not muted. Blocked. My phone rang less than 5 minutes later. "Mom," I answered. "Did you seriously block your brother?" "Yes. He's hurting." I leaned against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes. "So am I. But he's losing his business." "Mom," I said quietly, "I lost almost 2 years of my life in silence. He's losing a lie loudly." She went quiet. For a second, I thought the call disconnected. Then she finally whispered, "You sound cold." That hurt. It really did. But for once, it didn't destroy me. "No," I answered softly. "I sound clear." The next morning, Ethan's company page disappeared entirely. By Monday evening, Dad called me alone for the first time in years. No speakerphone, no mom coaching in the background. Just him. His voice sounded older somehow. "Savannah, did you know Ethan used your transfers to qualify for a business loan?" I sat upright immediately. "What?" "He listed your recurring payments as operating revenue." My stomach dropped hard. That wasn't just irresponsible. That was dangerous. Dad sighed heavily into the phone. The lender started asking questions after the deposits stopped. For several seconds, I couldn't even speak. Ethan hadn't only used my money to survive. He had used the appearance of my money to make his company look financially stable on paper. Dad spoke again, quieter this time. "I'm sorry, Vanna." I froze at the nickname. He hadn't called me that in years, unless he needed something from me. Carefully, I asked, "What happens now?" Another long silence. Then, "I don't think I can fix this for him." That sentence rolled through me like distant thunder. Something bigger was coming, and for once, it wasn't coming for me. The following week, Ethan made the mistake that finally shattered the family myth completely. He posted a long emotional message online about being betrayed by someone close and being forced to shut down a promising company after support disappeared overnight. He never used my name. He didn't need to. Family members immediately started texting me. One cousin wrote, "Business is hard. Maybe don't kick people when they're already down." Another sent prayer hands, followed by a lecture about forgiveness. I ignored all of them. Then Claire called me during lunch. "Savannah," she said immediately, "go read the comments under Ethan's post." I expected sympathy, support, people defending him. Instead, the very first comment came from one of his former drivers, a woman named Brianna. "Support disappeared? You mean the sister whose card paid for the warehouse? The same sister you called your silent investor? Maybe pay employees before posting inspirational speeches." My heart stopped. Another former employee replied underneath, "He told all of us family money was secured." Then payroll bounced. Then one of his vendors added, "We sent 3 overdue notices. Stop blaming your sister." Ethan deleted the post less than 20 minutes later, but screenshots had already spread through the family group chat. And for the first time, I didn't have to defend myself. Other people did it for me. That evening, my mother showed up at my apartment without calling first. When I opened the door, I barely recognized her. No makeup, no perfectly prepared speech, no tissues ready for Ethan. Just my mother standing there looking smaller and more tired than I had ever seen her. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. Part of me wanted to say no. A bigger part of me wanted to protect the peace I had finally started building, but I stepped aside anyway. She sat carefully on my couch and twisted her wedding ring around her finger while I remained standing near the kitchen. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she finally said, "I saw the screenshots." I waited silently. "I didn't know about the loan," she continued. "I didn't know about payroll bouncing. I didn't know he told people you were an investor." Her voice cracked slightly. "I thought you were helping because you wanted to." A tired laugh almost escaped me. "Mom, I wanted to help him the first time. Maybe even the second. After that, I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped." For the first time that evening, she actually looked at me. Not through me, at me. "Terrified of Ethan?" I swallowed hard. "Terrified of all of you." The words settled heavily between us. Undeniable, painful, true. She slowly covered her mouth with one hand. "Every time Ethan struggled," I continued quietly, "everyone turned toward me like I was the solution. Every single time I struggled, I got told to be patient, be understanding, be generous. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being your daughter and became the family safety net." Tears rolled down her face then, but this time they felt different. Not dramatic, not manipulative, just grief. Real grief. "I failed you," she whispered. And somehow that hurt more than her defending Ethan ever had, because part of me had waited years to hear those words. Another part of me hated how badly I still wanted them. I sat down across from her slowly. "You did," I admitted softly. She flinched, but she nodded. For a while the apartment stayed quiet except for the sound of traffic outside my windows. Then she spoke again. "Your father told Ethan we aren't paying the warehouse debt." That surprised me. "He didn't take it well. I'm not paying it either." "I know." I looked at her carefully, waiting for the hidden request underneath the conversation. The guilt, the pressure, the inevitable, "but maybe just one more time." It never came. Instead, she wiped her eyes and said, "I'm not here to ask you for money." I stared at her. Honestly, I didn't know what to do with that. Then she added quietly, "Ethan said if you don't come to the house tonight, he'll never speak to you again." To my own surprise, I almost smiled. "That's supposed to scare me?" Mom lowered her eyes. "It used to." She was right. A month earlier, that threat would have destroyed me. I would have rushed over immediately, desperate to fix things before Ethan could pull away from me emotionally. But now the silence between us already existed. All I had done was finally stop paying to keep it hidden. Still, deep down, I knew this story couldn't end through screenshots, ignored calls, and social media posts. I didn't owe Ethan rescue, but I did owe myself closure, so I grabbed my keys from the counter. "Fine," I said. "I'll come, but I'm not bringing my wallet." Mom nodded slowly. "I know." And that's how I walked back into my parents' house later that night. Not as the guilty daughter, not as the family fixer, not as the emergency backup plan. For the first time in years, I walked in as someone Ethan could no longer control. When I entered the living room, Ethan was standing near the window with a duffel bag sitting at his feet. For 1 second, I assumed he was leaving dramatically to prove some kind of point. Then I noticed the envelopes scattered across the coffee table. Overdue notices, loan documents, final demand letters, warehouse collections, and suddenly I understood. He wasn't leaving because he wanted freedom. He was leaving because the life built on my money had finally collapsed underneath him. Dad sat silently in his recliner, looking exhausted. Mom stayed near the kitchen doorway with her arms crossed tightly, like she was physically restraining herself from rushing over to comfort Ethan. When he heard me walk in, he turned immediately. His eyes were red, but his voice still carried bitterness. Happy now? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked toward the coffee table and looked down at the paperwork spread across it. Then I finally looked back at him. No, I said honestly, but I am free. He scoffed loudly. You ruined my life, and now you want to act enlightened about it. Dad's voice suddenly cut across the room. Ethan, enough. Every person in the room looked shocked, including Ethan. He turned toward Dad immediately. She did this to me. Dad stood slowly from the recliner. No, he said firmly. She stopped doing this for you. There's a difference. Ethan stared at him like betrayal had physically slapped him across the face. Mom stepped forward next. Her voice shook slightly, but she didn't back down. Your sister didn't destroy your business. You built something you couldn't afford to sustain and let everyone praise you while she carried it behind the scenes. Ethan looked between all of us in disbelief. So now everyone's against me? I crossed my arms. No, people are finally seeing you clearly. That hit him harder than yelling ever could have, because for the first time there was no audience left, no applause, no excuses, no carefully protected image, just consequences, receipts, debt, and the silence that follows a collapsing lie. Ethan sat heavily on the couch and pressed both hands against his face. I was going to fix everything, he muttered. I just needed more time. I sat down across from him, leaving space between us intentionally. That distance mattered. You didn't need more time, I said quietly. You needed more money, more silence, more people willing to believe the version of you that felt better than reality. He rubbed his face angrily. What do you want me to say? The truth. He laughed once, but the sound cracked halfway through. Then finally the words started coming. I lied, he admitted quietly. I told people I had investors. I told Mom you only helped at the beginning. I told Dad the company was stable. I used your transfers to strengthen the loan application because I thought once bigger contracts came through, I could repay everything before anyone found out. Mom covered her mouth again. Dad looked away toward the dark window, and inside me, something loosened slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet. Confirmation. And when I stopped helping, I asked softly. Ethan swallowed hard. I panicked. I held his gaze. No, when I stopped helping, you blamed me. He didn't argue. That silence was the closest thing to honesty he had given me in years. I slowly reached into my purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Then I placed it carefully on the coffee table between us. Ethan frowned. What's that? A boundary. He stared at me blankly. A what? A written boundary, I repeated calmly. I'm not paying your debts. I'm not co-signing loans. I'm not covering payroll, software, insurance, rent, or emergencies anymore. I'm not responding to abusive messages. And I'm not allowing Mom or Dad to pressure me into rescuing you again. He looked stunned. I continued before he could interrupt. If you want a relationship with me someday, it starts with a real apology and a repayment plan reviewed by a financial counselor. Not because I expect every dollar back, but because you need to fully face what you took from me. Ethan stared down at the paper. You're treating me like a criminal. I shook my head slowly. No, I'm finally treating myself like a person. My mother started crying again after that, but this time something was different. She didn't ask me to soften my words. She didn't tell me to be the bigger person. She just cried quietly while staring at the paper sitting between Ethan and me like it was the first honest thing anyone in the family had seen in years. Dad picked up the page and read through it carefully. Then he nodded once. "This is reasonable." Ethan looked at him in disbelief. "Reasonable?" he snapped. "I might have to file bankruptcy." Dad didn't flinch. "Then you file. I could lose everything." "Then you lose it." The room fell silent again. I watched Ethan's shoulders slowly cave inward, because those words had finally come from the one person who always protected him simply by refusing to confront him. He looked at me again then, but this time the anger had weakened. Underneath it was fear, real fear, and exhaustion. Quietly he asked, "Who am I supposed to be without all of this?" That was the first truly honest sentence he had spoken all night. For a second, I didn't see the golden child. I didn't see the fake entrepreneur. I didn't see the manipulative brother who spent years hiding behind my sacrifices. I just saw a scared man who had confused praise with identity for so long that he no longer knew the difference. And honestly, part of me wanted to reach across the table and comfort him. The old version of me definitely would have. She would have rushed to soothe him, to fix the pain, to make the room feel safe again. But the new version of me finally understood something the old one never did. Compassion without boundaries becomes self-destruction. So instead, I said quietly, "Then figure it out. Just stop using me as the mirror that tells you who you are." That finally broke him. Not dramatically, not loudly. Ethan just lowered his head and cried. Small, defeated tears. The kind that come after someone runs out of performances. Mom cried too. Dad looked older than I had ever seen him. And me? I just sat there breathing steadily for the first time in years. Eventually, Ethan whispered an apology, a real one this time. No excuses attached, no blame hidden inside it, no manipulation. Just, "I'm sorry." I didn't hug him. I didn't immediately tell him everything was okay, because it wasn't okay. Instead, I thanked him for finally saying it and told him I needed time. That was another boundary. A week later, Ethan officially shut the company down. He sold the expensive watch, moved into a smaller apartment outside Milwaukee, took a night shift warehouse job, and according to my mother, enrolled in a basic accounting course after a financial counselor bluntly told him he never truly understood cash flow well enough to run a business. Some relatives called the whole thing tragic. I called it overdue. Mom stopped introducing Ethan as self-made. Dad stopped asking me to sacrifice myself for family peace. And me? I finished my certification program with the highest evaluation score in my department. 3 months later, I accepted a promotion into audit leadership that paid enough for me to finally rebuild my savings without fear. I moved into a better apartment with large windows and a small balcony overlooking the river. The first night there, I sat alone with takeout and realized something almost unbelievable. My phone was silent. No emergencies, no panic, no one demanding pieces of me, just peace. Ethan and I didn't magically become close again overnight. This isn't one of those stories. Some damage doesn't disappear just because someone finally apologizes. Trust rebuilds slowly, sometimes painfully slowly. But about 6 months later, I received a notification from my banking app. $200 transferred from Ethan Cole. The note attached said, "First repayment. I know it's small. I'm starting anyway." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied with only 2 words. "Keep going." No speech, no emotional reunion, no dramatic forgiveness scene. Just 2 simple words and a boundary that remained intact. Because healing isn't rescuing someone again. Sometimes healing is finally letting people carry the weight of their own choices. What I learned from all of this is simple. Love is not measured by how much pain you tolerate from people. Real love does not demand that one person destroy themselves so another can avoid consequences. And setting boundaries does not make you selfish. It means you finally understand your life matters too. If someone only values you while you are useful to them, then losing their approval may actually be the first step toward freedom. Some people spend years confusing love with sacrifice. They believe staying silent is loyalty, carrying someone else's weight is kindness, and destroying themselves for family is strength. But the truth is, love without boundaries eventually turns into quiet suffering. I learned that the hardest part of walking away is not losing people. It's finally realizing how much of yourself you lost while trying to save them. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop rescuing the people who only value you when you're useful. Because the moment you choose your own peace over someone else's manipulation, your real life finally begins.